Green Europe will return to the era of black coal. And the continent that is the destination of immigrants. Its people are preparing to emigrate, and governments affiliated with the moderates will all turn to the right. The Russians turned the continent upside down and turned the diaspora into an inferno. And here's the story, and the news is either dying of cold or going back to the coal ages. Several European countries have decided to restart coal-fired power plants to fill the shortage of Russian gas that Putin cut off from his European neighbors, according to Reuters. This energy coming from coal, the European continent had previously announced that it was on the verge of eliminating dependence on it and reducing its use for fewer years. In the continent's quest to reduce carbon emissions, they said, for cleaner cleanliness, environment and a green continent in the future. But it is not easy to fulfill all desires, as the mouth of Europeans says. Russia's Gazprom decided to punish the old continent by reducing its gas quota. Although the Russian company claims that there are technical malfunctions, the real reason that everyone knows is the position of the Europeans on the Russian war and their support for America in imposing sanctions on the Russians. Because the Russians' goals are more than to force the Europeans back to using coal. Middle East Online reported that observers expected European migrations off the continent in winter in search of warmth and escape from frost. The expected destination would be the African continent, which used to export migrants to Europe, which means that boats that used to transport Africans fleeing poverty and misery towards the north may transport Europeans on their way fleeing the cold and frost towards the south. This is because the replacement and absence of Russian gas before the next winter may be almost impossible, and the countries that may receive these arrivals fleeing the cold are likely to be Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt. As for these waves of immigration, they include the elderly from Europe in particular, who may not bear the coming severe cold in light of the lack of means of heating that they were deprived of due to the lack of Russian gas, which has turned into a political tool and weapon in the hands of Putin, whom the Wall Street Journal accused of launching an open war on Europe in the field of energy, and its goal goes beyond economic strikes. According to the American newspaper, Capote's strategy is not hidden from anyone because he announced it in June of the year 2022 at an economic conference hosted by St. Petersburg, where Putin said that high energy prices bring difficulties to the continent in its economy, which will lead to social unrest and, consequently, the arrival of new governments for European countries. This talk needs a little clarification with the help of a Wall Street Journal report. Putin's goal is to turn the Europeans against their current governments because of high energy prices, and the resulting inflation and general price hikes, and thus will generate anger among the peoples that may lead to the rise of new parties to power. These new parties will be right-wing and nationalists who do not care about and support the Ukraine issue, which will lead to the disintegration of the current Western alliance. And that strategy has already begun, with a right-wing party withdrawing from the Italian government, forcing the Prime Minister to resign because of his support for Ukraine and siding with the West against what they see as the interests of the Italian people, their power and their entourage. Italy may only be the beginning and other European countries will follow, which means that the political map of Europe may change completely, and that is if Putin continues this energy war on the old continent. The continent and its leaders have so far only been able to secure an estimated 67% of the energy needed to weather the winter. And despite the many strategies it has pursued, the return to coal, nuclear power and even the issue of reducing consumption, the rest is up to Putin. Either he decides to make the winter soft for the Europeans, or he turns it around and turns the continent into hell with him. It depends on Putin's decision on the position of the Europeans themselves. Until now, they still completely put their hands in the American basket and continue to provoke the Russians, to the point that the US president recently signed the accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO, which means further provocation of the Russians on their backs. The Europeans, who so far seem to be the most affected by everything that goes on around them,